Hello, Whisperers. If you liked the first and the second story, subscribe. And this story will have you subscribed if you haven't already. Settle in. Turn the lights down low. Put on your headphones and listen closely. Tonight, we have a story that crawls beneath your skin, burrows deep into your bones, and stays there, festering in the dark long after the video stops. This is a tale from the cold, sterile depths of a hospital in Dhaka, where the boundary between the living and the dead is nothing more than a rusted, heavy steel door. Take a deep breath. Let's begin. They say death is the great equalizer. They say that when a body comes down to the Lash Kata Ghor, the morgue, it doesn't matter if it was a wealthy politician from Gulshan or an unidentified beggar scraped off the Komlapur railway tracks. Flesh is flesh, bone is bone. In the dark, on the freezing steel tables, we all rot exactly the same. But that is a comforting lie. It is a bedtime story told by people who get to sleep at night in warm beds surrounded by the breathing of their loved ones. My name is Bimal. I am a Dom. I am a Hindu born into a lineage of men who are tasked with opening up the dead. It is our generational curse. My grandfather cut bodies during the Great Famine, watching his neighbors turn into skeletons before they even reached his table. My father cut bodies during the war, washing the blood of the martyrs down the drain. And now, my hands hold a heavy steel. We are handed this burden because polite society deems us impure, untouchable, yet entirely necessary to handle the rotting, the broken, the bloated, and the abandoned. I spent my nights under the flickering, buzzing fluorescent tubes of a colonial-era hospital building in the heart of Dhaka. It is a cavernous subterranean room surrounded by yellowed peeling tiles that sweat moisture in the sweltering summer heat. The air down here has a physical weight. It has a taste. It is an overwhelming, nauseating cocktail of industrial phenol, sharp formaldehyde, and the sweet, stale, metallic scent of old blood. When you spend your entire life taking apart the dead, you learn something the doctors will never ever admit. The dead are not empty. To survive this life, you have to build a thick, impenetrable wall inside your mind. You have to sever the connection between what your eyes see and what your brain processes. My wall is built with cholai, a cheap burning local alcohol sold in crushed plastic bottles, and handfuls of little white sedatives I pocket from the hospital dispensary when the ward boys aren't looking. I drink until my hands stop their violent trembling. I dry swallow the pills until the cold, heavy pressure behind my eyes goes comfortably numb. I need the chemicals. I crave the thick, gray fog they bring to my mind. Because if I am completely sober, I start to hear the room breathe. The doctors, the educated men in their crisp, clean coats with expensive stethoscopes draped around their neck. They look at a corpse and see only biology. A puzzle of organs and tissues to be weighed, measured, and recorded on a clipboard. If I tell them I saw a lifeless gray finger tap the steel table while I was turning my back, they smile condescendingly. Bimal, the doctor would say, patting my shoulder with a latex-gloved hand. It's just rigor mortis. The muscle fibers contract as the ATP depletes. It's basic chemistry, nothing more. If a body releases a long, wet, groaning sigh when I turn it over to inspect the spine, the doctors don't even look up from their notes. Just trapped here escaping the collapsing lungs, Bimal. Don't let the isolation run away with your imagination. But the doctors only visit the Lash Kata Ghor during the bright, safe hours of the day. They do not stay for the 3 a.m. shift. They don't mop the floors when the only sound is the rain outside and the hum of the refrigerator compressors. Trapped air does not hum Bangla lullabies when the room is empty. Rigor mortis does not make a severed hand tap a slow, rhythmic 1, 2, 3 against the edge of the aluminum drainage sink. It started so subtly, so quietly that I eagerly blamed the liquor. Oh, I wanted it to be the liquor. My mind playing cruel tricks on an exhausted, malnourished body. It was a Tuesday night, about 6 months ago. I was washing down the floor tiles with a heavy rubber hose. The water was spiraling down the central drain in a pink, foamy vortex of water and blood. I had my back turned to the 3 occupied steel tables to grab my scrub brush from the corner bucket. When I turned back around, the hose slipped from my grip. The body on table number 2, an old man who had died of a massive stroke on a city bus, had his head turned completely to the left. But he hadn't been facing the left when I stripped him of his clothes an hour prior. His neck had been stiff, locked rigidly, staring straight up at the ceiling lights, but now his head was resting on its cheek. His cloudy, unblinking, milky eyes were staring directly at the exact spot where I had just been standing. I froze. I waited for a logical explanation. I waited for the tendons to snap back, for the head to roll back to the center. It didn't. He just stared at me. I drank heavily that night. I stumbled back to my cramped, damp tin shed room in a slum just outside the hospital walls, downing half a bottle of spirit just to force my brain to shut off. I thought the cholai would bury the memory, but alcohol only thinned the veil. Over the next few weeks, the morgue began to actively reject my presence. The dead were getting restless. I started seeing them in my peripheral vision. I would be hunched over a sink, scrubbing a bone saw with a wire brush, and out of the corner of my eye, I would see a tall, disjointed shadow standing perfectly still by the cold storage drawers. It wasn't the shadow of a hanging gown or a medical card. It had the distinct shape of a man with his shoulders completely dislocated, arms hanging inches past his knees. When I would snap my head around, heart hammering in my chest, there was nothing there. Just the humming steel wall of the freezers. But the cold air from the vents would carry a whisper. Bimal! It's too cold in here. Bimal! It wasn't just the shadows. The bodies on the table were fighting their biology. A month after the old man, they brought in a victim of a horrific road accident from Mirpur. A young man's jaw had been the resident doctor on the evening shift had roughly stitched the corpse's mouth with thick black nylon surgical thread to make the face somewhat presentable for the family to claim the next morning. I was at the adjacent table, filling a glass jar with formaldehyde to preserve a tissue sample. The room was dead silent, save for the drip of a leaky faucet. Then, I heard a sound. I stopped pouring. I slowly turned my head. The young man on table 1 was lying on his back, but the black threads sewing his lips together were pulled impossibly taut. They were vibrating. One of the thick nylon threads holding the corner of his mouth shut violently snapped, curling back against his pale cheek. The muscle underneath was flexing. The corpse was actively, forcefully trying to open its shattered jaw. I backed away until I hit the cold storage wall. The threads kept snapping, one by one, popping like tiny guitar strings until his mouth suddenly fell open with a sickening crack. I backed away until I hit the cold storage wall. The threads kept snapping one by one, popping like tiny guitar strings until his mouth suddenly fell open with a sickening crack, releasing a long, raspy, foul-smelling exhale that blew a stray piece of gauze right off the table. I didn't finish my shift that night. I ran to the dispensary, stole an entire bottle of sedatives, and locked myself in my shack for 2 days. But the horror of my job doesn't stay in the morgue. It clings to my clothes like the smell of bleach. It sinks into my pores. It follows me out of the heavy steel doors, past the sleeping night guards, and into the dark alleyways. When you take apart the dead start trying to take you apart as well. I would lie on my hard wooden cot, paralyzed by the sedatives, staring at the dark corners of my room. As the drugs peaked, blending with the alcohol in my bloodstream, the shadows would begin to shift. They would peel away from the corrugated tin walls, elongating into the distinct mangled silhouettes of people I had dissected that week. I would hear the wet, heavy slap of bare, dead feet pacing just outside my thin door. I would squeeze my eyes shut, pressing the heel of my hands into my socket until I saw a brilliant burst of stars, praying for the dawn to burn the shadows away. "It's the July," I would whisper to myself, my voice trembling. "It's the pills. You're losing your mind, Bimal, that's all. Calm down." But over the last month, the alcohol has been failing me entirely. The dead are building a tolerance to my poison. The breaking point, the night the veil finally tore wide open, happened 4 days ago. It was raining, a monsoon downpour that drowned out the sound of the city traffic and made the old hospital walls weep with dark, spreading patches of dampness. The thunder shook the very foundation of the building, making the fluorescent lights flicker and buzz angrily, casting long, strobing shadows across the tile. The police brought in an unidentified young woman. They pulled her from the dark, toxic, churning waters of the Buriganga River. She was waterlogged. Her skin was incredibly pale, bloated and waxy, smelling sharply of industrial waste, silt, and rotting water hyacinths. Her dark hair was plastered to her face in thick, muddy ribbons, but her eyes... Usually, when a body is in the river for days, the eyes are the first to go. But her eyes were perfectly preserved, wide open, staring intensely at the peeling paint on the ceiling, with an expression of pure, frozen, terrifying rage. The police officers didn't stick around. The smell of the morgue, combined with the river water, was too much for them. They dumped her roughly on table 3, handed me the soaked paperwork, and practically ran back upstairs to the dry, warm lobby. I was entirely alone. I walked over to my metal locker at the far end of the room. I took a heavy swig from my flask, the cheap alcohol burning a familiar, comforting trail down my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the warmth to hit my stomach. My eyes snapped open. I stared at the small rusted mirror taped to the inside of my locker door. In the reflection, Just for a fraction of a second, I saw a tall grey silhouette standing directly behind me. I whipped around, dropping my flask. It clattered loudly against the floor. There was nothing there. Just the empty expanse of the morgue. The two empty tables, the river woman on table 3. The cholai, I muttered to myself, rubbing my temples. It's just the cholai. I wiped my mouth, slipped on my thick yellow rubber gloves and walked over to my instrument tray. I kept my back to her as I sorted through the tools, picking up the cold steel scalpel. I froze. My breath hitched. I slowly turned around to face table 3. When the police dropped her off, her head had been facing straight up. Now her head rolled completely to the right. Her cheek was pressed against the steel. Those pristine, angry eyes were staring directly at me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I swallowed hard. Gravity, I whispered aloud, my voice trembling. The table is tilted for the drain. It's just gravity. I approached the table. The smell of the burigonga was suffocating. I reached out and pushed her cold red face back so she was looking at the ceiling. Touching her felt wrong. Her skin was spongy, giving away under my fingers like wet dough. I positioned myself over her chest. The standard procedure is the Y incision. One cut from each shoulder down to the center of the chest, and then a straight line down to the abdomen. I raised my scalpel. My hand was shaking so badly, the metal vibrated under the buzzing lights. Look up! I gasped and jolted, wildly swinging the scalpel at the empty air beside me. Nothing. I was completely alone. I was losing my mind. The isolation was finally cracking my sanity into pieces. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut, took a deep, shuddering breath, and looked back down at her chest. I needed to finish this and get out. I placed the sharp tip of the blade just below her left collarbone. I pressed down slightly, feeling the resistance of the cold, rubbery skin. Before I could drag the blade down, a hand clamped around my wrist. My blood turned to ice. My lungs seized. It wasn't a muscle spasm. It wasn't a biological reflex. The grip was impossibly tight, desperate, and freezing cold. Her swollen, waterlogged fingers dug painfully into my skin through the thick rubber gloves. Her jagged, broken nails pressed deep into my flesh. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't pull away. I was paralyzed, anchored to the steel table by a corpse. I slowly, agonizingly forced my eyes to look at her face. My hand was trapped in her vice grip. Her chest wasn't moving. She wasn't drawing breath. But her jaw slowly began to unhinge. Tendons snapped inside her cheeks as her mouth opened impossibly wide, far past the limits of living human. Black, sludgy river water pooled at the back of her throat, bubbling up over her swollen tongue, thick with mud. And then she whispered. She bloody whispered. I know what you see when you close your eyes. I screamed, a raw, guttural, animalistic sound of pure, unadulterated terror. I ripped my arm away with so much panicked, violent force that I tore the skin right off her hand. I stumbled backwards, my heavy rubber boots slipping on the wet floor until my spine slammed hard against the tiled wall. The scalpel clattered to the floor, sliding away into the dark beneath a metal cabinet. I pressed myself against the wall, hyperventilating, waiting for her arm to drop lifelessly back to the table, but the corpse didn't stop moving. Slowly, violently vibrating as she fought against her stiffened, dead muscles of her own body. She began to sit up. Her spine popped with every inch she rose, her head tilted towards me, her wet, muddy hair clinging to her bloated face. Those pristine, dead eyes locked onto mine, tracking my every movement across the room. The shadows in the corner of the morgue began to detach themselves from the wall. In my peripheral vision, I saw tall, dark figures standing beside the other empty tables, turning their featureless head towards me. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of the dead chanting my name. "The medicine won't keep us out anymore." The river woman gargled, her voice layering over the whispers in the room. Black river water spilled from her unhinged lips, pooling onto her lap and dripping onto the steel floor with a heavy, sickening splat. "We are going home with you." I didn't wait. I abandoned my father's training. I abandoned the body. I left the lights on. I shoved myself off the wall, burst through the heavy steel doors and ran blindly up the concrete stairs, bursting out into the pouring rain. I ran through the flooded, ankle-deep streets of Dhaka. The rain lashed at my face, blinding me, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and tasted of copper. Stray dogs scavenging in the alleyway barked wildly at me, but as I passed, they whimpered and shrank back into the shadows. Not because of me, but because of what their animal eyes saw trailing right behind me in the rain. I reached my shack in the slum. I threw myself inside and slammed the corrugated tin door. I locked the deadbolt. I pushed my heavy wooden table against it. I shoved my bed against the table. I was soaked, shivering, weeping like a child, frantically tore through my belongings, finding my stash. I consumed every pill I had. I drank every drop of cholai left in the plastic bottles. I needed to sleep. I needed to erase the image of her sitting up on the table. I needed the fog. That was 4 days ago. I haven't left the room since. The hospital has been calling my cheap mobile phone over and over, but I haven't answered. My battery died yesterday, taking my only source of light with it. I took all the drugs. I drank all the liquor. I suffered through the fevered sweat and the violent bone-rattling shaking of withdrawal. I threw up until there was nothing left but yellow bile. But sobriety only made it worse. Without the chemicals, the wall in my mind has completely collapsed, leaving me utterly defenseless. I am huddled in the furthest corner of my room, pulling my knees to my chest. The room is suffocatingly hot, smelling of my own sweat, vomit, and fear, yet I am shivering uncontrollably. Because she kept her promise. They all did. They followed me home. In the darkest corner of my room, where the faint moonlight leaking through the cracks, where the tin doesn't reach, a shadow is standing. It is taller than a normal man. It doesn't move, but I can hear it breathing. The whispers are constant now. They don't stop. They don't pause for breath. They don't need to breathe. They come from the rotting wooden floorboards. They come from the small drainage hole in the corner of the room. They murmur about the cuts I made. They whisper about the organs I weighed on the rusted scale. They tell me how horribly cold. It is inside the steel drawers. Bimal, it hurts. Bimal, why did you cut me so deep? Bimal, why did you leave me in the dark, Bimal? I cover my ears, pressing as hard as I can, but the voices aren't coming from outside. They're inside my head. They're in the walls. I can smell the morgue in my bedroom. The scent of phenol is so strong, it burns my nostril. I can smell the rotting water hyacinths from the Buriganga River. Every time I close my eyes, I feel them touching me. Cold, wet fingers brushing against my cheek. A severed hand resting on my shoulder. The feeling of bloated, waterlogged skin pressing against my back. I can't take the noise anymore. The drugs are gone. The alcohol's gone. And the voices are only getting louder, pressing against my eardrums until I feel like my skull is going to crack open like an eggshell. There is only one way to make the room quiet again. Only one way to join them so they stop hunting me. If I'm dead, I won't have to cut them anymore. So I crawl across the floor. I pull a thick coil of rough rope from beneath my bed. It was meant to tie down the tin roof during cyclones or heavy winds. My hands are shaking so violently it takes me an hour to tie the slipknot. I fumble in the dark, my fingers raw and bleeding. I toss the other end over the exposed wooden crossbeam holding up my roof. I pull it tight. I test the weight. It holds. I drag my plastic water bucket to the center of the room, positioning it directly beneath the hanging rope. I step onto the bucket. My legs are weak, trembling under my own weight. The plastic groans under my feet. The air up here near the ceiling is stagnant. It is so hot. It smells intensely of the river. It smells of old blood, rusted steel. I reach up with trembling hands and slip the rough loop around my neck. The coarse fiber scratched against my throat, but it feels like a promise of peace. Just a few seconds of agonizing pressure, a momentary burning in the lungs, and then silence. Finally, endless, dreamless, chemical-free silence. I close my eyes. Tears stream down my face, hot and fast. I pray to whatever gods that are listening, hoping they forgive Adam for abandoning his post. I prepare to kick the plastic bucket away. But just as my foot shifts to push, I freeze. I feel it. A freezing, wet, bloated hand gently wraps around my left ankle. The grip is impossibly tight. The swollen fingernails dig deep into my skin, hurting me one last time. And from the darkness directly below me, right beside the bucket, the waterlogged voice of the river woman whispers, "Don't worry, Bimal. Jump, we're waiting." I scream and I kick the bucket. Shubhoratri. Sleep lightly.